Imagine for a second that you're just sitting on your couch, controller in hand, and you're completely absorbed in playing The Last of Us.
Oh, yeah. What an experience.
Right. You're experiencing this deeply emotional, totally cinematic, carefully authored narrative. I mean, every camera angle, every line of dialogue, even every tragic pause has been meticulously scripted to make you feel a very specific way.
Exactly. At a very specific time.
Yeah. But now, okay, shake that off. Imagine instead that you are playing Minecraft.
Okay, totally different vibe.
Completely. You're just standing in the middle of a blocky forest, wildly punching trees to get wood, desperately trying to build this little dirt hut so you can hide from a horde of zombies before the sun goes down.
Before the creepers get you.
Exactly. Now, both of those games are telling a story, but the way they communicate meaning to you is, well, it's entirely different.
Night and day, really.
So today, we are diving into a really rich stack of sources. We've got modules from the Game Beyond course, excerpts from Rules of Play, Jesse Schell's brilliant book, The Art of Game Design, and some expert lectures from Extra Credits and Vlambeer.
That is a fantastic lineup of material.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this massive tension between narrative, so scripted design, and declarative or emergent design. Do you tell a story, or do you let the player build one?
That's the big question.
It is. We want to uncover how the hidden systems of games can communicate these deep values without ever speaking a single line of dialogue, and, how you can actually apply these concepts to understand the systems in your own life.
It really is a fascinating divide. I mean, if you want to understand why a game like Minecraft feels so fundamentally different from a heavily scripted cinematic experience, we have to look at how games actually deliver meaning.
Right.
And the course provides a brilliant framework for this. It splits game design into two major approaches, which are narrative design and declarative design.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think people usually assume that the quote-unquote story of a game is just the dialogue. Or, the cutscenes.
Oh, absolutely. That's the common misconception.
But that's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
So narrative design is explicitly delivered meaning. It relies on the traditional tools of storytelling that we basically borrow from literature and film.
Like characters and plot arcs.
Yeah, exactly. It uses characters, plots, story arcs, dialogue. You, as the player, are explicitly told what the stakes are, what is happening, and why it matters to the world.
Got it.
But declarative design, on the other hand, is entirely emergent. It communicates meaning strictly through systems, rules, and your interaction with those rules.
And no script at all.
Right. The meaning doesn't come from a script.
Yeah.
It emerges from what you choose to do and the mechanical consequences of those actions within the simulation.
Okay, so to put a visual on it, narrative design is kind of like taking a guided museum tour.
Okay, I like that.
Like the curator is walking you through, telling you exactly what to look at and exactly what to feel about the art.
Yes, very direct.
But declarative design is like being dropped into a sandbox playground. The rules of physics and the toys that happen to be available, those tell the story based on what you actually do.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it, yeah, because it highlights the mechanism of play rather than just the aesthetic.
Right.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, neither approach is inherently better or worse. I mean, they just create fundamentally different psychological experiences.
So it's about what the designer is trying to achieve.
Exactly. And the core tension that game designers wrestle with here, the absolute center of this debate, is the concept of player agency.
Agency. So the ability to make a choice that actually matters to the outcome.
You got it. When a game leans too heavily into narrative design, it runs a very specific risk. If the game insists on holding your hand, constantly interrupting your gameplay with unskippable dialogue.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. Or forcing you down a singular narrow hallway of plot where your choices don't alter the outcome at all, well, you start to lose that agency.
You stop being a player.
Exactly. You become a passive viewer. You're essentially just hitting a button to advance to the next scene of a movie.
Which totally defeats the purpose of the medium. I mean, if I want a purely passive experience, I'll just go watch a movie,
Exactly.
But games offer something unique. It makes me think about what Jesse Schell refers to in his text as the story machine.
Ah, yes. The story machine concept is brilliant.
Games like The Sims or Roller Coaster Tycoon, these games don't have a traditional script. There is no authored protagonist.
Nope, none at all.
Yet, if you ask anyone who plays them, they can tell you these incredibly elaborate, highly personal, dramatic, and usually hilarious stories that happen to them while playing.
And that right there is the raw power of emergent storytelling, which is a concept heavily explored in the rules of playtext.
So how does that actually work mechanically?
Well, emergence happens when a modest, simple set of rules is applied to a limited collection of objects. The interaction between those simple rules creates infinitely complex and unpredictable results.
Like in The Sims?
Yes.
Yes.
Take The Sims. The game isn't writing a script about a tragic house fire.
Right.
The game simply has a hidden math equation for a hunger meter, a cooking skill stat, and a flammability variable for the stove.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah. So when a character with low skill tries to satisfy a high hunger meter using a cheap stove, the math collides, a fire erupts, the character panics, and suddenly you have this deeply memorable, completely unscripted tragedy.
So simple rules, complex outcomes. It's the interaction of the systems that writes the plot.
Right. And to understand why this feels so expansive to the player, we have to look at what Shell calls the action gap.
The action gap.
Yeah. Think about a book. The characters in a novel have a limitless number of verbs available to them. A character can thoughtfully gaze at the moon, write a nostalgic letter, or hesitate with a lump in their throat.
Right, the author can write literally anything.
Exactly.
Right.
But in a video game, the player has a highly constrained, very short list of verbs. You can run, you can jump, you can shoot, you can interact.
It's basically whatever buttons are on the controller.
It is. But because those actions are simulated on the fly, constantly interacting with the physics and the hidden math of the world in real time, it bridges that gap.
Oh, wow.
If you've ever played a game where you ignored the main quest for 40 hours just to wander the woods and craft weapons, you've experienced this.
Guilty as charged.
Right. The simulation makes you feel like you have boundless possibilities because the permutations of those few simple verbs interacting with the world's rules are practically infinite.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
If you just throw a bunch of mechanics at the player, drop them in a sandbox and say, go make your own fun, isn't that just a massive cop-out for a developer who doesn't want to bother writing a good plot? Like, what if the player does nothing?
That is exactly the trap of lazy design. And it's something Scott Rogers specifically warns against in Level Up.
Okay, so he addresses that.
He makes it abundantly clear that emergent gameplay is never an excuse for under-designing your game. You cannot just throw random rules together, rely on accidents, and hope the player miraculously stumbles into a fun experience.
Right, that would just be chaotic.
Exactly. The designer has to act like a gardener.
Okay, I like the gardener analogy, but it sounds a little abstract. How do you actually choreograph a rule without taking away the freedom of the sandbox?
It's all about resource allocation and boundaries. You don't just throw seeds on concrete and walk away. You prepare the soil.
Make the conditions right.
Yes. In game design, that means tweaking the spawn rates of enemies, or carefully limiting how much ammunition the player can carry, or placing a highly desirable item just out of reach.
So you're guiding them without telling them.
Exactly. You aren't telling the player what to do, but you are choreographing the conditions of the world so that the actions that naturally emerge from the player are predictably engaging. You design the boundaries of the playground.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when a designer properly tends that garden, the mechanics themselves start communicating values without a single word of text.
They really do.
It's silent storytelling, meaning entirely through systems.
Absolutely.
Think about a co-op game where you and a partner share a single, limited health pool. If I take damage from an enemy, your screen flashes red too.
That creates instant panic.
Right. The game doesn't need to force us to sit through a 10-minute cinematic explaining the power of friendship and mutual sacrifice. The mechanic itself forces us to look out for each other.
Yes.
It demands constant communication. It teaches connection and interdependence far better and honestly far more intimately than a scripted piece of dialogue ever could.
That is a great example. But it raises an important question, though. If mechanics implicitly teach values, what happens when designers aren't paying close attention to the values their mechanics are actually teaching?
Oh, good point.
The Extra Credits lecture on propaganda and ethics dives deeply into how this can go very wrong.
Right. They look at how hidden systems can inadvertently push some pretty intense biases.
They do.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand the argument they are making strictly from a mechanical perspective.
Right, looking just at the system.
Exactly. The creators of the Extra Credits lecture argue that mechanics can inadvertently indoctrinate players through lazy design.
Mm.
For instance, they highlight a very common trope in older role-playing games regarding the design of female characters' armor.
Ah, like the classic chainmail bikini trope.
That's the one. They point out that often as the armor gets statistically better, meaning it mathematically offers higher defense against attacks, it visually becomes more and more revealing.
Okay, so mechanically, what is that actually doing?
Well, the lecture argues that regardless of the visual aesthetic or the artistic intent, the underlying mechanic is that the game is rewarding the player with better survivability for choosing less clothing for the character.
I see.
Their perspective is that the system itself is inadvertently, mechanically incentivizing the player to treat the character as a sex object in order to optimize their stats and win the game.
Wow, so it's literally woven into the math of the game.
Precisely. The optimal strategy for winning becomes tied directly to that visual representation. And the lecture also points to modern military shooters to illustrate this on another level.
How so?
They argue that when a game uses specific real-world demographics, say people from a specific geographic region or wearing specific cultural clothing, as the default enemy, it employs a Skinner box mechanism.
Let's break that down for a second because that's a heavy behavioral psychology term.
Ah.
How does the Skinner box actually function in this context?
So a Skinner box relies on operant conditioning. It's a loop of cue, routine, and reward. In the context of these shooters, the lecture argues that the game doesn't just ask you to shoot, it manipulates your dopamine.
The reward center of the brain.
Exactly. It pairs the visual of a specific real-world demographic with a bright, flashing point increase on your screen, a satisfying sound effect, and an in-game achievement.
Instant gratification.
Yes. The creators of the lecture argue that this mechanically conditions the player's brain through intense positive reinforcement. They suggest that players become so completely focused on the mechanics of getting a high score, mastering the recoil, and getting that dopamine hit, that they never stop to question the premise of who this system is mathematically rewarding them to target.
So the mechanics are essentially the body language of the game.
I love that phrasing.
Right. Because the scripted dialogue or the marketing copy on the back of the box might be saying one thing, like, oh, you are the noble, righteous hero saving the world. But the mechanics are silently showing you the truth of what the game actually values and rewards.
That is a perfect way to put it. Body language cannot easily lie. If a game story claims to be a thoughtful exploration of peaceful diplomacy, but the only verb you have available on your controller is shoot.
Then it's a game about violence.
Exactly. The system's body language is telling you the truth. The mechanics will always overpower the narrative script.
Okay, so this brings us to a bit of a crossroads. Because if pure narrative heavily restricts player agency, and pure emergence runs the risk of either being a chaotic, storyless mess, or, silently teaching accidental values through sloppy mechanics, where is the middle ground?
Right, how do you balance it?
Yeah, do we just have to choose between a good story and good gameplay?
Not at all. In fact, the most memorable and profound experiences usually exist in the hybrid sweet spot between the two. The course materials reference the theories of Doug Church and Mark LeBlanc, who mapped this out beautifully.
What do they suggest?
They talk about the delicate art of blending embedded narrative with emergent narrative.
Okay, embedded being the authored stuff, the script, and emergent being the player's actions in the sandbox.
Right. Embedded narrative is the pre-authored backstory. It is the setting, the deep lore, the world you are placed into.
Got it.
Think about the classic Lego game Spybotics. It had a highly imposed narrative, a rich cyberpunk world, specific factions, detailed mission briefings, and a defined goal. That's the embedded layer.
But the actual gameplay wasn't scripted like that.
Exactly. The emergent narrative is the unpredictable moment-to-moment action that you generate. In Spybotics, the actual gameplay was programming a physical robot to navigate an obstacle course. How the robot failed, bumped into walls, or miraculously completed the course was entirely emergent based on your code and real-world physics.
Or contrast that with something like NBA Live.
A great comparison. NBA Live has almost zero embedded narrative. The lore is simply, it is a basketball game.
Right, there's no deep backstory for the basketball court.
No scripted story at all. But the emergent narrative, the tension of a tied game, the drama of a buzzer-beater shot in the fourth quarter against your best friend, is incredibly high.
It's all emergence.
Yes. So the ideal hybrid game provides the rich embedded context, but your emergent actions within that context write the actual script of your specific playthrough.
Oh, this makes me think of Left 4 Dead.
Oh, yes.
That has to be the absolute perfect example of this hybrid approach operating at the highest level.
It really is a brilliant case study in managing tension.
Because it has a totally embedded setting, you and 3 friends are survivors in a zombie apocalypse trying to reach a safe room. The lore is there.
The embedded narrative is very strong.
But the actual moment-to-moment pacing, the rising and falling action, isn't scripted by a writer sitting in a room somewhere. It is controlled dynamically by an AI that Valve called the director.
And the math behind that director is what makes it a masterpiece of declarative design.
Exactly. It acts almost like a virtual dungeon master. It mathematically calculates your team's stress levels in real time.
It's always watching.
It monitors how much health you have left, how accurately you are shooting, how far apart the players have wandered from each other, even how long it's been since you last fought a horde.
And then it adapts.
Right. Based entirely on those cold, hard variables, it dynamically adjusts the game. If you're doing too well and breezing through the level, the director calculates that the tension is too low, and it spawns a massive horde of special zombies to create sudden panic.
To spike the stress curve.
Yes. And if you are barely surviving and out of ammo, it mathematically forces a peak fade. It backs off, stops the enemy spawns, drops some health kits, and even changes the music to give you a breather.
What's fascinating here is that it is using a purely declarative mathematical system to artificially pace what feels like a highly authored emotional narrative arc.
It feels like a movie, but it's math.
Exactly. It is literally mapping out a stress curve, similar to a cinematic 3-act structure, but it does it responsively to your specific agency.
It's generating the roller coaster tracks right in front of the cards you drive it.
That's a great way to visualize it. You still have the engine and the steering wheel, but the game is dynamically building the hills and the drops based on how fast you are driving.
I love that.
And this synthesis brings us to the ultimate goal highlighted in the course materials, which is ludonarrative harmony.
Ludonarrative harmony. That is a great term. Break that down for us.
So ludo comes from the Latin for play or games, and narrative obviously meaning story. Ludonarrative harmony is considered the artistic and contemplative peak of game design.
Okay.
It happens when the actions the player must perform in the game, the core mechanics, perfectly align with the values and themes the story claims to hold.
So it's when the body language perfectly matches the spoken words.
Yes. When they conflict, we call it ludonarrative dissonance.
Which is what?
That's when the story tells you that your character is a reluctant pacifist who hates violence, but the mechanics of the game demand that you gleefully shoot hundreds of nameless enemies just to see the next cutscene.
Right. That always feels so weird when you play it.
It does. The player feels alienated. It creates cognitive dissonance because the systems and the script are at war with each other.
But when they align.
Exactly. When they align, when the mechanics physically enforce the story's emotional themes, the player truly becomes the author. You aren't just hearing a story about the desperate struggle for survival. You are feeling the mechanical weight of that survival in your hands.
So what does this all mean for you? Why should you, listening to this right now, care about the difference between a scripted plot and a hidden math equation?
It's a valid question.
Because whether you are a game developer or you are leading a team at a tech company, designing a marketing project, or just trying to understand the media you consume, you have to realize that the rules of any system heavily dictate the stories that will predictably emerge from it.
They shape the reality.
Exactly. If you want to change the culture, the narrative of your workplace or your community, you cannot just write a new mission statement.
Words aren't enough.
No. You often have to change the mechanics first. You have to ask, what behaviors is this system actually rewarding?
It is a profound lens to view any organizational or social structure through.
Yeah.
You can't just change the embedded narrative. You have to alter the declarative rules.
By the way, if you want to explore how to build these structures yourself, we share our narrative framework document inside the course. It is an incredible tool for mapping out exactly where your embedded story and your emergent mechanics intersect.
It's a great resource. And, if we take a step back and apply this lens beyond just game design and project management, Jesse Sho leaves us with a rather provocative final thought regarding what he calls the gamepocalypse.
The gamification of everything.
Exactly. If games are fundamentally just mathematical systems that generate emergent stories based on hidden rules, well, take a hard look at the real world.
Oh, wow.
Look at our economy. Look at social media algorithms that mechanically reward outrage and polarization with increased visibility.
Because that's what keeps engagement high.
Right. Look at fitness trackers or credit scores or frequent flyer miles. What if our daily lives are already just massive overlapping declarative games?
Yeah, whoa, that is honestly a little terrifying, but also kind of liberating, because if you realize it is just a system, if you realize you are inside a Skinner box, you can start to see the rules governing the rewards.
Exactly. It forces you to ask yourself a critical, contemplative question about your own life. Are you passively following a scripted, embedded narrative that someone else designed for you? Or are you utilizing your agency to understand the hidden mechanics, exploit the rules, and build your own emergent story?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? Are you just sitting on the couch, waiting for the next cinematic cutscene to tell you how to feel? Or are you going to start punching some trees, gather your own resources, and build your own reality? Keep looking for the hidden rules, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Do you want to learn more about game design? Try our game design course. Go from learning the basics to becoming a master game designer. No coding skills needed. Taught by award-winning game designer Gabe Mack, this course is filled with hours of videos, puzzles, tools and exercises to turn you into a serious game designer. Why are you waiting to harness the power of play? Visit school.thegamebeyond.com to sign up today.